start with Booking's story. Where does Booking sit within the customer's travel journey? What sets Booking apart? And, how has the company adapted through the challenges of the pandemic and the subsequent travel recovery?
Yeah, it's a nice way to open up, tell the story because it's a good story. I've been at the company now over 23 years. So I remember back when we were a tiny little company. Now we're a big company, and we, like you said, you talk about things we've been through and what we've experienced, and all the way through to where we are today. It's something that I like. I wish we could use the whole half hour to talk about it, but of course we don't. So I'll be rather brief. Look, we're here to provide a service. The service is to provide customers to experience travel better if you're a traveler customer, or to provide a benefit if you're a supplier customer, i.e. a hotel or something like that. That's our job. That's how why we exist. So throughout the journey of this company has been always doing it, providing people with more selections, providing with great prices, being able to do the whole thing of traveling easier. And we know it's not easy. We know that. And it's getting better, but it's nowhere where it should be. And that's part of where we're going to, is to create something that's even better. And we certainly know if something goes wrong, you got to be there to provide the service to help fix whatever problems there are. And that builds loyalty. That makes it so somebody says, why do I use Booking.com versus lots of other choices? It's because we're offering all these things so somebody feels this is where I'm going to go. And you see that all the time. I get lots of emails from customers. Most of them, not surprisingly, are something where there was a disappointment. Everything from there actually is a problem that we actually didn't do something right, all the way to something like it rained on their holiday and they want a refund, which we do not do. But I also get occasionally, I get that nice email about what a wonderful experience it was, how it made things so much better, or something went wrong, we fixed it right away, and they're loyal to us for life. And that is why I do this business, why I'm here 23 years, is continue to build this out. Now, you ask, where are we in the journey for a customer in terms of that? We're there whenever they need us, whether it's the discovery at the very beginning and trying to figure out what to do, where to go, all the way through picking the individual selections to actually doing the booking in a way that's efficient for them to do it. Payments, for example, that the way they want to pay, all the way to the supplier being paying the supplier the way they want to get paid, and everything in between. It's an enormous job, really. This whole thing of travel is so exhaustive throughout the world. Everybody likes to travel, and there's so many things to do in it. But I'm glad where we are, albeit it was hard, the pandemic. You said the pandemic was a terrible thing. It wasn't the first time we've been in a situation where things are tough. I was at this company and we were a U.S.-only company, and 9/11 happened, and that was pretty darn hard on travel with every single plane grounded. I was there when the .com implosion. And that was pretty bad in our company. And I was there for the terrible Great Recession. That was a pretty bad problem. And things that were localized, whether it be a volcano in Iceland that shut down Europe for some time. I was actually in Europe at the time, couldn't get home. That was hard for a while. Or our operations in Asia and Japan with the terrible tsunami and the nuclear plant problem there. Look, there are problems all the time around the world of travel, but we have come through every single one of them, whether it be global like this pandemic or be localized. Either way, we've been able to continue to build on our success. And the numbers in the first quarter just, I think, really show that we've come out fairly well. I'm pleased with where we are.
Great. I couldn't let you get away from a macro question, but let's talk about sort of what you're seeing in terms of travel demand. Glenn, you talked about how, you're still seeing strong demand for travel during the peak summer travel season. I know that a lot can change, but sort of catch us up on what you're seeing from a travel demand perspective, and how consumers are reacting to a slightly more uncertain macro environment when it comes to their travel spend.
I like the way you said that, John, about things could change, because that's kind of like our lives, isn't it? I mean, again, every day something can change, and who knows? But I'll tell you, we did our earnings call. Things are good. We said in the call, resilient, I think was a good word to say it. And the easy way to always measure this is go and look at a price. You go out, search anywhere for a price for a hotel, a price for a car rental, a price for an airline ticket. And, when there's slack, that usually shows up in a lessening in price. And anybody who's curious about how things are going, just go on and try and book a hotel place right now, or book an airline ticket, and that'll give you a good indication of whether or not there's demand or not. Look, what's going to happen in the future? I go with who knows, right? You can, you want a different opinion, pick a different economist about what's going to happen over the next couple of quarters to get a different answer. And certainly there is everybody sees the inflation rates are still very high. Some countries have come back a little bit, but the fact is people are spending. They continue to spend. And certainly there's a lot of built up savings from the pandemic period. And, so everybody looks to the St. Louis Fed that talks about the excess savings and looks at how that's coming down, but at what rate, what's going to happen. Look, I make a general rule that I'm not going to worry too much about things I can't control, and I certainly can't control the economies. What I can control is making sure that our product is improved so that people prefer to use our services versus somebody else's services. I know that in the long run, travel is going to continue to grow. It always has, it always will. People like to travel. So GDP over the long run is going to continue to increase. Travel is going to increase a little bit faster than that. And our job is to get an even bigger amount of that business by getting more share by producing a better service. That's the way we're playing it. And I can't predict I can't predict the number of car accidents are going to be on I-95 going to work in the U.S. And I can't predict next summer's GDP growth rate. What I can say, though, I can absolutely say that as long as we continue to do what we've been doing, we'll continue to the success that we built so far to today.
Okay, great. And last quarter, you talked about how the booking window has lengthened a bit. Catch us up on how the booking window trended last year, what you saw in the first quarter for the booking window. And then I think related to that, talk about how, sort of consumers reacted to the travel, how the travel recovery looked last year, what that means for comparisons, and sort of layer that in with sort of your expectations for the booking window.
Yeah, let me take that one, John. So throughout the COVID period, really up until the end of last year, call it 2021, 22, booking windows have been shorter than they were pre-pandemic. Why? People were just, obviously there was less certainty about people's ability to travel, restrictions, lockdowns, etc. So the booking window stayed shorter for that 3-year period of time. First quarter was the first time we saw the booking window expand versus pre-pandemic, versus 2019. So we saw an expansion of the booking window in the first quarter, and that continued into April, driven by Europe and driven by the US. Now, the obvious question is, what's driving that? So clearly there is a post-pandemic versus pandemic phase where people now, I think, are viewing very much on viewing their travel on an unconstrained basis, at least from a pandemic point of view. So they're more able to kind of put their plans in place a little bit sooner and longer than they were last year, and maybe they're now more enthusiastic about making sure those plans are in place this year than they were pre-COVID. And I think we're also seeing, Glenn talked about, you both mentioned it, we have a relatively uncertain macro out there. So I think people are looking to make sure they don't see prices go up even further before they make their bookings. They want to kind of lock in availability whilst it's still there, because things are shaping up to be a strong summer. I think those are some of the factors that are driving this expansion of booking window, which is, again, in contrast to what we saw during COVID and is even longer than we saw in 2019.
Great. Let's turn to AI. There's been a lot of talk about AI across every company that I cover, but I think Booking is arguably in a great position to leverage AI. Talk about sort of how you see AI fitting into your strategy over the long term, and then also how have you been using AI in the past, and what are some of the capabilities that you've already built behind that?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? How a news item comes out, somebody releases something brand new, and all of a sudden everybody goes to that side of the boat and everything is AI. Right now, it's November's release of ChatGPT. Of course, that had been AI has been coming on for a very long time. I can go all the way back to the 90s, the 1990s, when I was a trader in Morgan Stanley Asset Management. We're coming all sorts of algorithmic trading things, which is a type of AI. Now you get to Priceline. I joined in 2000, and such. We're already using AI and things, and throughout it for 20-something years, we've been coming out with new types of AI. Now most of it's machine learning models trying to do predictability of things, and you're basically coming up with, let's be serious, a lot of it is just talking about different types of correlations, trying to bring in data and stuff. And that was really the key part for us. So when you did a search, you would end up with a search result that could be different than somebody else's search result because of that machine learning model that's predicting this is what you would like. And combining some of the attributes we may know about you, we may not even know anything about you. We may not know where you're coming from and things, or what time of day it is, or what year, and that type of stuff. So all that stuff, and everybody was doing that. We were out there very quickly doing that stuff. And setting up your A/B testing stuff really then confirms whether or not the machine language model was predicting correctly or incorrectly. You see the results pretty quickly or not when you're at scale. But then you come out with this whole new thing, this conversational AI through these, ChatGPT and all the similar type things, of which there are many. It really may provide us with a much better way, potentially, to buy and use services like travel. That could be it, because I've talked for a long time about trying to build out this thing I call the connected trip, because travel is frustrating. And sometimes, really, wouldn't you want to just, like the old style, talk to a travel agent the way it used to be when I was young? And I would talk to a human being and have a conversation. And she would know a lot about me already because I'd already traveled. I'd used her in the past. So she had some idea of what I liked and what I didn't like and what I could afford and what I couldn't afford. And she'd offer up a few. Imagine that's the same thing. Only now, instead of me with a human being, this is this conversational AI agent that's doing the same thing. Only has a much broader database to choose from, has a much better way to really understand me and what I may like better, and can bring in data from all other areas if anything goes wrong and fixes it in all different permutations. That's the future potential, which is great. And we've got a lot of people who do AI, right? We got a tremendous number of people. We got lots of money we've been investing over many years. We are well positioned for this. But this, I get you to caution people about this. It's exciting, like so many things have been exciting with new things come down the road. The actual results take time. And they're going to take longer than I think a lot of people think it's going to take. And there's an element that didn't happen in the past for some things, and that's regulations. Every country around the world is thinking about, this AI stuff. Maybe we should have some regulations about this. And then groups like Europe, which is a very large area, saying, we'll have one that's across the entire EU, some regulations. Then the US saying, we're going to have our own kind here. And then are there going to be conflicts in terms of these different regulations? And how are companies that are multinational have to deal with this? Which ones are going to fork the code and have different ones for different regions? How's that going to work? And what is it actually going to do in terms of what results you can provide or not? And then, of course, the biggest issue that people continue to see right now is that these large language models produce things that are actually just wrong. Now, that's okay if all you're asking is some information that's really not that consequential. And I give an example in the past. I want to know who was the last person to hit 350 for the Yankees. I type that into, let's say, ChatGPT, and maybe it'll give me some results. And maybe they're right, maybe they're not. Maybe because somebody who didn't even play for the Yankees, not a big deal. But in travel, you better be right. You can't be doing stuff that's like that hotel doesn't exist. It's just completely made up. So you got to be really careful on that. And that's something that we recognize, and we know that there's certain types of AI principles that you have to come up with and ways to do things so it's not discriminatory, it's not biased. So I say that this is one of the most exciting things I've ever seen. It's also going to take some time for us to achieve what we want. But there's one thing that we do, I think a lot of people recognize that is a benefit that'll be much sooner, and that is improving the efficiency of your operations. So things like coding, where you have a developer using some type of Copilot. Copilot is actually a name of one of those services, but there are many of them coming out now. And there doesn't have to be just developing code. There are ways of writing things. There are all sorts of things where AI will help very quickly enable companies to become somewhat more efficient. And that will be a good thing. If people can do that better, will therefore have more efficiency, and they can use that efficiency to invest more in some other areas, something like that. So that's a benefit that I think we also have a good position for, again, because our knowledge of these areas. Long-winded answer. I hope it was helpful.
It was very helpful. So Glenn, you alluded to sort of rates being up a couple of answers ago across the lodging industry. Catch us up on what lodging rates have done over the past few years and how consumers are reacting to those higher rates. And then I'm curious whether you think that has anything to do with the booking window getting longer, because people are seeing rates go up across hotels and they're just like, I want to book earlier before they go up even more. And then I think lastly, just from a behavioral perspective, how do consumers think about travel? Do they set a sort of a budget for the full year and they spend that budget? And if rates are really high, they just will make less trips. Just talk about that behavior and how we should think about that.
Yeah, so lots of interesting elements and lots of questions in there. So here are a couple things. So yes, for a little bit of the history of rates. I mean, rates went down a lot during the pandemic, and you have no demand. Rates can go down, but they didn't go to zero, of course. And then when people start all coming back, they start going back up very quickly, particularly because supply was very compressed, because a lot of hotels didn't have enough workers. So they couldn't even service all the rooms. So they weren't even trying to sell all the rooms in the building. They were only going to sell some of them at a much higher rate, because that's all they could service. The future is very interesting. And your point's a good one. History has shown that in areas of high inflation, people do purchase things or services quicker because they are afraid of the cost going up down the road. The question is, though, the current rates of inflation around the world are not hyperinflation. They're not those type of things. You go back to Germany in the 30s, you go back, or 20s, and you go back to Zimbabwe, where inflation, when you inflation over 100% Argentina, then people will start, buying everything that day as soon as you get your paycheck. I don't think we're at a level like that for that, but there certainly are some people, no doubt, think I should buy now because it's going to cost more down the road potentially. The other area, which I don't think you did mention, I think maybe David mentioned it, which is also interesting, is fear of missing out because all the rooms are going to be booked. And that fear, maybe last summer, somebody wanted to go and get a certain location, wanted to get a nice place to stay, and they found out, there were no rooms there. And now they're trying to get ahead of the curve on that. That's another element potentially coming into. Then your issue, okay, does that just bring stuff forward or not? One, or the other thing of, the people say, well, I'm only going to spend so much on travel anyway, and so it's not it. That's a hard question to answer. I don't think because people have a lot of savings built up, as I said. And are they going to just continue spending more on travel than anything else? Maybe they bought more things during pandemic, and now I didn't get to travel so much, so this is still the revenge of travel, or travel revenge as it's called, is still happening. I don't know. Or is maybe a permanent change? People just valuing more. Look, I'm going to value more going out, exploring the world, and enjoying. Hard to say. I can't make. I can make a projection, but everybody can. Everybody can just throw a dart. Nobody knows the answers to these things. Our job just continue to make a better service. If we do that, we win in the long run.
Yeah, Glenn, and I did mention, in the commentary about booking window that, that certainly the fear of rates potentially going up is one of the factors that may contribute. Now, John, you asked about booking behavior, and we kind of look at that, and we look very carefully at what's going on in terms of what mix levels of hotels people are booking, what's happening to the length of stay. Because you mentioned budget, right? If your budget is getting tight and you still want to go on vacation, then you might trade down in your hotel star level, and you may go for 10 weeks rather than 2 days, or rather than 10 days rather than 2 weeks, or some version of that. And we're not seeing evidence of either of those things happening right now. We are seeing customers spending through the rate increases, staying at the same mix of hotel levels as they were before, and basically having the same length of stay.
Okay, great. And let's talk about payments. It's been a big initiative for you. Talk about sort of what you've been doing there, how it fits into your broader strategy around Connected Trip, and sort of what do you think it provides to the booking business that you didn't have before? Why is it so valuable, and why are you sort of pursuing it?
Yeah, no, it's incredibly important for so many reasons. Start off with the first thing, which isn't even into the Connected Trip. Just start with alternative accommodations, right? You want to have good alternative accommodations, then you better have a payment method, because there's nobody at the alternative accommodations to take the payment. The way in an agency model, when somebody shows up at the hotel, you hand over your credit card and you pay. But you go on alternative accommodations, there's nobody there, right? So how are you going to do that agency fight? You need a payment method to do that. One, two, then go to the next thing is, even again, away from the Connected Trip, just talking payments, people like to pay in different ways. And this is so interesting culturally, so many people in these conversations I have with investors and analysts, all that, so many of them are Americans. And they think of payments, they think, well, there's let's see, Visa, there's MasterCard, there's American Express. Oh, Discovery too, that's another one. Oh, and cash. And some old people know about what's called a check, where you write something, right? Because they don't spend much time outside the US, or know much. You go outside the US, there's so many different ways to pay. It's off the chart crazy how many different ways to pay. And people like to pay in the way they like to pay. Now go the flip side over to the supplier. They like to take the money a certain way. A lot of them like to prefer it to be sent right into their bank account. That's a nice way they like it generally, into their bank account. So now you got to come up with a system, a platform, a way to be able to take somebody who's using M-Pesa, right? Somebody's paying in M-Pesa. A hotel doesn't take M-Pesa. They want the money in the thing. You got to do that, right? Or check, you may not know M-Pesa, but you certainly probably know Ideal. Or maybe you don't actually know Ideal. And I can go through this giant list, and that's really important. Now go for another thing is, a lot of suppliers cost them a lot of money to process payments because they're small, let's say, or, depending on what country they're in. Well, we as a very large company should be able to provide a benefit by being able to process those payments at a lower cost, maybe give some of it over to the supplier and keep some of it for ourselves. And that's a nice way we can make money that way. And then there's another real interesting phenomenon is the issue of just offering more payments seems to increase the conversion rate. Why? I can't explain. Even if they don't use one of these alternative ones, just having it there in the past has shown some type of an increase in conversion, which is really good. Now go to the biggest thing, the Connected Trip. To make that work, you really have to have just one payment. Really, the way to do that is a way that people can pay in one way, and then we can give them all sorts of different types of merchandising in that payment platform in a way. And we can give discounts. And if people get a credit, we can put it into their e-wallet credit and do all sorts of fancy ways to market, provide better services. So there are so many things that make payments really, really important. And that's why I'm really happy to see the progress that we've made in that. David, what did I forget? Because there's so many things to talk about. I'm sure I missed something important.
I think you did a pretty good job of covering the key points. And obviously, you can see just in the numbers that we talked about how the mix of payments has increased in Booking.com over the last few years as we've rolled that platform out. So, with basically the highest levels, 4 to 5% in the last quarter, really rapid change. Where you go back to 2019, the numbers were more like 15%. So you see how rapidly the platform is being adopted by both our travelers and our partners.
Great. Skipping around a little bit, let's talk about merchandising and marketing. How do you think about the mix between those two? And how are you using or leveraging the loyalty program to drive adoption and retention?
So everything runs together essentially. So you talk loyalty, this is our Genius program for Booking.com, which now also has some kind of connections with some of our other brands too. We have different status levels for different programs. The issue with merchandising, marketing, all these things, we use every single sophisticated way we can with data, analysis, seeing what kind of return we're going to get over what time period and where to do it. We have choices. If you just forget about merchandising, just talk about marketing. We got lots of different channels. You can spend money on paid for performance at Google. You can do something in Meta. You can spend money on brand everything. Oh, that's one element. Now expand it further. Now you have merchandising, where you can offer up some type of a discount or some type of a benefit. It doesn't have to be just money. It could be free breakfast. Could be skip a line on an attraction. All sorts of things you put in there too. Then you can add on how much do you want to put in yourself, or does your supplier person want to put in money? Maybe they don't want to discount their price, but they'll give a credit for some other service if you book with them, like a ride from the airport to the hotel. Maybe the hotel will provide that. By the way, it goes back to why you need payments. So there are lots of different combinations, lots of ways to do this, and you're always trying to come up with what is the optimal algorithmically, driven what it should be. And we continue to play different ways, look at the results, and over time try and optimize that for the future. I will definitely say one of the things about payments is in the past we couldn't do any of that merchandising. We didn't have a payments platform. You can't do it without that. So that was another reason why it was so important to get that going, and why we're very pleased of where we are now in terms of the usage and the ability to put it in for the different services.
Okay, great. And so let's talk about margins. You're looking for a couple points of margin expansion this year. You called out take rate increase and increased direct traffic as some of the key drivers. So walk through how you're thinking about margins for the full year and what you see as sort of the drivers of that margin improvement.
Yeah, John. So we absolutely did reiterate we expect a couple of percentage points of margin expansion this year versus last year. That is mainly coming from less pressure due to timing. Timing impacted, the timing effect of bookings versus revenue, and the growth of bookings last year impacted margins in 2022. So most improvement in 2023 is from that timing pressure going away. Now, going forward is where we've talked a little bit about continuing to deliver gradual improvements in margins after 23, primarily driven by increased direct mix and better leverage on more fixed expenses, and those will offset the margin pressure mix from expansion of the newer businesses like flights and payments, which are moving faster than accommodations.
Okay, great. And one quick one on sort of fixed costs. They grew a little bit more than expected in really the first half, based on your second half commentary. What's sort of driving the increase in the first half, and what's going to cause the moderation in growth in fixed costs in the second half?
Yeah, so a few things are contributing to the first half. The biggest element of fixed costs is personnel. And we talked about why the personnel costs were growing this year, principally on the back of people we hired last couple of years, plus some target hiring this year. But the reason why it's been a little higher than expected in the first half is due to a number of factors, but one of them is lower attrition. That has slowed down very rapidly, much more rapidly than expected. We did expect some reduction, but slowed down a lot more. And that's taken us a while to kind of get the balance right between the hiring engine and obviously making room for those hires through the attrition that slowed down a fair amount. We did say that going forward after this year, we don't expect our costs to be growing as rapidly in 24 and 25 as they did this year. In the second half, we didn't update our full year guidance. We're not going to at this point in time. We didn't update it on the last call, but we did say that we of course confirmed our margin expectation guidance. But we did say that the rate of expense growth in the first half is probably going to put a little bit of pressure on our full year guidance for expense growth for the full year.
Okay, great. And I just want to squeeze one more in. Talk about capital return framework. You announced a big authorization. How are you planning to use that capacity for repurchase?